This is HOA craze. It started as a rumor and ended as a case file. I do not care what management promised you, Colleen yelled across the mailbox cluster, waving a laminated guideline sheet in the air like it was a warrant. The sheet caught the late afternoon glare, and I could not read a single word on it. She held it just out of reach, the way you hold evidence you do not want examined. I stood there with my phone in one hand and a printed copy of the Woodland Crossing Ridge Association covenants in the other, trying to keep my voice level, while she accused me of parking violations that did not exist in the rulebook I was holding. The accusation was specific. I had parked my truck in the guest lot overnight 3 times in the past month, and each violation carried a $50 fine. The problem was that the covenant section she cited, Article 7 subsection C, said nothing about guest parking time limits. I pointed that out. She told me the minutes were revised after approval, and that was allowed. That sentence hung in the air for a second, and I realized I had just heard something that did not make sense. I live in Duluth, Minnesota, in a neighborhood called Woodland Crossing Ridge, where every complaint turns into a fine if the wrong person is in charge. Colleen Martinez runs the Pool and Amenities Committee, but she acts like she controls access to the entire subdivision. I work for the City Parks Department, so I know what permits look like, I know what right-of-way rules say, and I know when someone is making up authority on the spot. That day, at the mailbox cluster, I asked her to show me the revised minutes she was talking about. She told me they were on the portal. I pulled up the portal on my phone right there, found the March meeting minutes, and read the parking section out loud. It matched my printed covenants word for word. No overnight restriction. Colleen did not blink. She said I was looking at the old version, and the updated file had been posted 2 weeks ago, under a different file name. I scrolled through every document folder. There was no second file. I asked her to send me the link. She said she did not have time to do my research for me. That was the moment I realized this was not a simple mistake. Colleen had a tell. Whenever she was cornered, she would square her shoulders, adjust the strap on her crossbody bag, and deliver her catchphrase in a flat, final tone. She did it right there. "This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive," she said, and then she turned and walked toward her golf cart without waiting for a response. I stood there with my phone still open to the portal, my neighbor Janet watching from 2 mailboxes down. Janet is on the landscaping committee, and she has been in this neighborhood longer than Colleen. She did not say anything at first, just gave me a look that said she had seen this before. I walked over and asked her what Colleen meant by revised minutes. Janet glanced around, lowered her voice, and told me there was an incident 3 years ago where a homeowner got fined for a shed that was supposedly too close to the property line. The homeowner fought it, claimed the meeting minutes had been altered after the fact to add a new measurement rule, but by the time he brought it up at the next meeting, the original minutes were gone from the portal, and the board said he was misremembering. He paid the fine and moved out 6 months later. I asked Janet if anyone kept copies of the old minutes. She shrugged and said the management company was supposed to archive everything, but documents had a way of disappearing when Colleen was involved. I went home and pulled every covenant document I had saved when I moved in 2 years ago. I am the kind of person who downloads PDFs the day I close on a house, because I have seen what happens when someone rewrites the rules after the game starts. I opened my files and compared them to the current portal versions. Most of them matched. Then I opened the March meeting minutes and noticed something I had missed on my phone. The file metadata said it had been created on March 7th. The meeting had happened on March 5th. That was normal. Someone types up the minutes after the meeting, but the last modified date was March 23rd, 2 days after Colleen had issued my first parking fine. I checked the April minutes. Same pattern. Created April 3rd, meeting on April 1st, last modified April 18th, 1 day after my second fine. I did not have proof that Colleen was personally editing the files, but I had proof that someone was touching them after they were supposed to be finalized. I took screenshots of every metadata field and saved them in a folder on my desktop. Then I started looking for the pattern Janet had mentioned. I needed older minutes, so I sent a records request through the portal on a Thursday morning. The form said requests would be fulfilled within 5 business days. I asked for all meeting minutes from January 2 years ago through the present, plus any correspondence related to parking enforcement and vendor contracts. The request went through, and I got an automated confirmation email. 5 business days came and went, no response. I sent a follow-up message through the portal, no response. On day 8, I called the management company directly and spoke to a property manager named Dennis. He had the kind of forced smile you can hear over the phone, the voice of someone who has been asked the same question 100 times and knows the answer will not help. He told me the request was in the queue and they were short-staffed. I asked him if 8 days was normal. He said sometimes. I asked him if he could at least confirm that the request had been assigned to someone. He said he would check and call me back. He did not call me back. On day 10, I got an email from Colleen, not from the management company, from Colleen personally, using her HOA committee email address. The subject line was Records Request Clarification. The body of the email was 2 sentences. Your request has been forwarded to the appropriate parties. Please allow additional time for processing due to the volume of materials requested. I replied and asked what the new timeline was. She did not answer. That same afternoon, I got a notice in my mailbox. It was printed on Woodland Crossing Ridge Association letterhead, and it said I owed $150 for 3 parking violations, payable within 10 days or subject to a lien process. The notice listed the same 3 dates Colleen had yelled at me about, and it cited the revised Article 7 subsection C language that I still could not find anywhere in the official documents. At the bottom, in small print, it said disputes must be submitted in writing within 5 days of receipt. I was already on day 10 of waiting for the records I needed to dispute it. I called my neighbor Janet and asked if she had any old meeting minutes saved. She said no, but she knew someone who might. His name was Eric, and he used to be on the board before Colleen joined. He had gotten into a fight with her over vendor contracts and eventually resigned. Janet gave me his number, and I called him that night. Eric answered on the second ring, and when I told him I was dealing with Colleen and revised minutes, he laughed. Not a happy laugh, a tired, knowing laugh. He said, "She is still doing that?" I asked him what he meant. He told me that during his last year on the board, Colleen had pushed through a contract with a towing company called North Shore Tow and Recovery. The contract gave the company authorization to tow any vehicle in violation of parking rules, and Colleen was the one who decided what counted as a violation. Eric said he had objected because the contract did not require photographic evidence or a second opinion, and it paid the tow company $80 per tow, plus storage fees. The board voted it down. 2 months later, the meeting minutes for that vote were updated on the portal to reflect a passing vote instead of a failing vote. Eric brought printed copies of the original minutes to the next meeting and accused Colleen of altering records. She said the printed copies were drafts and the portal version was official. The board president at the time, a guy named Sam, backed Colleen, and Eric resigned a week later. I asked Eric if he still had those printed copies. He said he did, in a binder in his garage. I asked if I could see them. He said he would dig them out and meet me the next day. We met at a coffee shop in the parking lot near the neighborhood entrance, and he handed me a 3-ring binder that was stuffed with printed minutes, emails, and handwritten notes. He had highlighted every discrepancy he could find between his printed copies and the portal versions. There were 7 meetings where the vote tallies did not match. 5 of them involved vendor contracts. 2 involved rule changes related to parking and amenities access. Every single discrepancy favored Colleen or a vendor she had recommended. I took pictures of every page with my phone. Eric told me to be careful. He said Colleen had a way of making people disappear from the process, and if I pushed too hard, she would find a way to lock me out of meetings or bury me in procedural delays. I thanked him for the warning. That night, I opened the binder photos on my laptop and cross-referenced them with the current portal files. The North Shore Tow contract vote was the smoking gun. Eric's printed copy showed a vote of 3 in favor, 4 against. The current portal version showed 4 in favor, 3 against, with 1 board member's vote flipped. The flipped vote belonged to a guy named Ron, who had left the board a year ago. I did not know Ron, but I found him on the neighborhood Facebook group and sent him a message. I explained what I was looking into, and asked if he remembered how he voted on the tow contract. He replied within an hour. He said he had voted against it, and he still had the email he sent to the board secretary that night confirming his vote. He attached a screenshot. The email was dated the night of the meeting, and it clearly said he was voting no on the tow contract because he thought the terms were too favorable to the vendor. I saved the screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. Now I had 3 pieces of evidence: metadata showing the minutes were modified after finalization, Eric's printed minutes showing vote discrepancies, and Ron's email proving his vote had been changed. I still did not have the revised parking rule Colleen kept citing, but I had enough to prove she was altering records. The question was how to use it. I could file a formal complaint with the board, but Colleen was the one who controlled the agenda, and I had no guarantee my complaint would even make it onto the schedule. I could go to the management company, but Dennis had already shown me how slow that process was. I could go to small claims court, but I needed to exhaust internal remedies first, or risk getting the case dismissed. I decided to do all three at once, starting with the most public option. I sent an email to the entire board using the addresses listed on the HOA website. The subject line was formal complaint, re-altered meeting minutes, and parking enforcement. In the body, I summarized the evidence, the metadata timestamps, the vote discrepancies, Ron's email, and the missing records request. I attached screenshots of everything. I copied Dennis at the management company, and I copied my attorney. Even though I did not have an attorney yet, I just put my own email address in the CC line and labeled it attorney copy so it looked like I had legal backing. Then I hit send. Within an hour, I got a reply from the board president, a woman named Linda. She said the board took my concerns seriously and would discuss them at the next meeting, which was 3 weeks away. She said I was welcome to attend and speak during the homeowner comment period, which was limited to 3 minutes per person. She also said that any documents I wanted entered into the record had to be submitted 72 hours in advance. I replied and asked if I could get a copy of the current parking enforcement policy. In the meantime, she did not answer. 2 days later, I got another notice in my mailbox. This one was different. It was not about parking, it was about my front yard landscaping. The notice said my grass exceeded the maximum allowable height of 3 inches, and I had 5 days to correct it or face a $50 fine. I went outside and measured my grass with a tape measure. It was 2.5 inches. I took photos from 4 angles with my phone, including one with the tape measure in the frame. Then I sent another email to the board with the photos attached and asked them to explain how 2.5 inches exceeded 3 inches. No one replied. The next day, I got a third notice. This one said my trash cans were visible from the street, which violated the aesthetic guidelines. The guidelines said trash cans had to be stored out of sight except on collection days. It was collection day. I took a photo of my trash cans at the curb with the garbage truck visible in the background, 2 houses down. I sent that photo to the board too. Still no reply. I realized I was being set up. Colleen was flooding me with violations to create a paper trail that made me look like a problem homeowner, so that when I showed up at the meeting with my evidence, she could point to the stack of notices and say I was retaliating. It was a smart play, and it would have worked if I had not been documenting everything, but I was. Every notice, every email, every photo, every timestamp. I had a folder on my desktop that was starting to look like a legal case file. I also realized I was running out of time. The meeting was 3 weeks away, but my attorney needed one more document today, and the HOA was stalling to run out the clock. Except I did not actually have an attorney, I needed one. I called a lawyer named Angela, who specialized in HOA disputes. I had found her website during my initial research, and her consultation fee was reasonable. I met her at her office the next morning and walked her through everything: the altered minutes, the metadata, the vote flip, Ron's email, the missing records request, the retaliatory notices. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You have a case, but we need to move fast." She explained that if the board finalized the parking fines and started the lien process before we could get the evidence in front of a judge, I would be fighting an uphill battle. She said the best move was to file an emergency motion in small claims court to freeze the fines and compel the HOA to produce the unaltered meeting minutes. She also said we needed to get the tow contract on the record, because if we could prove Colleen had a financial relationship with the tow company, that was a conflict of interest that could void every enforcement action she had taken. I asked her how much it would cost. She said the filing fee was $75, and her time would run about $800 if it stayed in small claims. If it escalated to district court, it would cost more. I told her to file the motion. The motion went in that afternoon. Angela emailed me a copy, and I forwarded it to the board and the management company with a note that said I was pursuing legal action and expected full cooperation with discovery. Within 2 hours, I got a phone call from Dennis at the management company. He sounded different this time, less forced smile, more actual concern. He said he had just been informed of my motion, and he wanted to let me know that the records request I had submitted 3 weeks ago had been located and was being prepared for release. I asked him why it had taken a legal filing to locate it. He did not have a good answer. He said I should expect an email with a download link within 24 hours. I thanked him and hung up. The email arrived 18 hours later. It contained a link to a zip file with 2 years of meeting minutes, board correspondence, and vendor contracts. I downloaded it immediately and started going through the files. The first thing I noticed was that several of the meeting minutes had two versions, an original file and a revised file. The revised files all had later modification dates, and in every case, the revisions favored Colleen or a vendor. I opened the North Shore tow contract. It was a 3-page PDF, and buried on page 2 was a clause that said the HOA would pay the tow company a $5 administrative fee for every vehicle towed, in addition to the $80 tow fee paid by the homeowner. The administrative fee was paid quarterly, directly from the HOA operating budget. I cross-referenced the payment dates with the HOA financial reports that were posted on the portal. Sure enough, there were quarterly payments to North Shore Tow listed under vendor services. I added up the payments over the past 2 years. It came to nearly $4,000. That was a lot of administrative fees for a neighborhood with maybe 300 homes. I called Angela and told her what I had found. She said the administrative fee was the evidence we needed. If we could prove that Colleen had pushed through a contract that financially benefited a vendor while she was altering minutes to hide opposition votes, that was fraud. She said we needed to find out if Colleen had any personal connection to North Shore Tow. I asked her how we would do that. She said I should start by looking at business filings. Minnesota has a public database for business registrations, and if Colleen or anyone in her family was connected to the tow company, it might show up there. I spent the next hour searching the database. Colleen Martinez did not appear anywhere in the North Shore Tow filings, but the company had been registered 5 years ago by a man named David Martinez. I ran a property search for David Martinez in Duluth. He owned a house 4 blocks away from me. I checked the Woodland Crossing Ridge resident directory. David Martinez was listed as a homeowner. I checked the last name against Colleen's HOA profile. Colleen Martinez, married, spouse name not listed. I ran a marriage record search. Colleen Martinez married David Martinez 16 years ago. David owned the tow company. Colleen controlled the parking enforcement. The contract paid the company nearly $2,000 a year in administrative fees, plus whatever the homeowners paid in tow and storage fees. I had just found the motive. I sent everything to Angela in an email with the subject line "Evidence of Conflict of Interest." She replied 5 minutes later, "This changes everything. File an amended motion. I am adding a claim for breach of fiduciary duty and requesting an audit of all vendor payments." She filed the amended motion that afternoon. I forwarded it to the board. No one replied. The board meeting was now 2 weeks away, and I had a decision to make. I could show up with my evidence and hope the board would take it seriously, or I could take a more direct approach. I decided to do both. I printed out every piece of evidence I had: the metadata screenshots, Eric's binder pages, Ron's email, the tow contract, the business filings, the marriage record, the payment ledger, and Angela's motion. I put it all in a black 3-ring binder with tabs labeled by category. Then I made 3 copies, one for me, one for Angela, and one for the board. I also made a 4th copy and mailed it to the State Attorney General's office with a cover letter explaining the situation and requesting an investigation into HOA governance practices. I did not expect the AG to do anything quickly, but I wanted it on the record that I had reported it. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a man's voice said, "This is Dave Martinez. I understand you have been asking questions about my business." I stayed calm and said, "I have been reviewing HOA vendor contracts as part of a records request." He said, "You need to be careful about making accusations." I said, "I have not made any accusations. I have filed a motion in small claims court requesting an audit, and I have provided documentation to support that request." He was quiet for a second, then he said, "My wife is trying to do her job, and you are making it harder." I said, "Your wife altered meeting minutes to approve a contract that pays your company thousands of dollars a year. That is a conflict of interest, and it is potentially fraud." He hung up. I immediately called Angela and told her about the call. She said, "Do not engage with him again. If he contacts you, refer him to me. Forward me his number." I sent her a screenshot of the call log. The retaliation escalated. 2 days before the board meeting, I tried to log into the HOA portal to check the meeting agenda. The portal said my account had been suspended due to outstanding violations. I called Dennis at the management company and asked why my account was suspended. He said it was an automatic system response when a homeowner had unpaid fines. I told him the fines were disputed and under legal review. He said he understood, but the system was automated, and he could not override it without board approval. I asked him to get board approval. He said he would try. My account stayed suspended. The day before the meeting, I got an email from Linda, the board president. The subject line was agenda revision. The email said the board had decided to move my complaint to a closed executive session due to the legal nature of the issues, and I would not be allowed to attend that portion of the meeting. The email also said that any evidence I wanted the board to consider had to be submitted 72 hours in advance, and since I had missed that deadline, my complaint would be tabled until the next meeting. I called Angela immediately. She said, "They cannot do that." The Open Meetings Law in Minnesota requires HOA boards to conduct business in open session unless they are discussing personnel or pending litigation. Your complaint is neither. We are going to show up tomorrow and force them to hear it. She said she would attend the meeting with me. The meeting was held at a community center near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early with Angela and my evidence binder. The room was set up with a folding table at the front for the board members and about 30 folding chairs for homeowners. Colleen was already there, sitting at the far right end of the board table with her crossbody bag on the chair next to her and a stack of paper packets in front of her. Linda sat in the center. The other board members filtered in over the next 10 minutes. By the time the meeting started, there were about 20 homeowners in the audience, including Janet and Eric. Colleen saw Eric, and her expression tightened. Linda called the meeting to order and started with the usual procedural items: approval of the previous meeting minutes, treasurer report, committee updates. Colleen gave the pool and amenities report. She said pool season was coming up, and there had been some recent issues with parking enforcement and homeowner compliance. She did not mention me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. When Linda got to new business, she said the board had received a formal complaint from a homeowner regarding meeting minutes and vendor contracts, and the board had decided to address the matter in executive session after the open meeting concluded. I stood up. Angela stood up next to me. I said, "Excuse me, but under Minnesota law, this complaint does not qualify for executive session. It involves alleged alteration of public records and a conflict of interest in a vendor contract. Those are matters of governance, and they must be discussed in open session." Linda looked at Colleen. Colleen looked at me and said, "This is not the time for procedural arguments. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing, and we will address it at the next meeting." Angela said, "He already submitted it in writing. You received it 3 weeks ago. You also received a court filing 2 days ago. The board has a legal obligation to address this matter tonight, in front of the homeowners." Linda looked uncomfortable. She said, "We were advised by our attorney that executive session was appropriate." Angela said, "Then your attorney gave you bad advice. If you proceed to executive session on this matter, we will file a motion tomorrow alleging a violation of the Open Meetings Law, and you will be personally liable for any damages." The room went silent. Linda looked at the other board members. One of them, a man named Frank, said, "Let's just hear him out. If he has evidence, we should see it." Linda hesitated, then nodded. She said, "Fine, you have 5 minutes." I opened my binder and started with the metadata screenshots. I explained that the March and April meeting minutes had been modified after they were finalized, and the modifications coincided with parking fines issued to me. I showed the side-by-side comparison of Eric's printed minutes and the current portal version, highlighting the vote discrepancy on the North Shore TOW contract. I showed Ron's email proving his vote had been flipped. Then I showed the tow contract with the $5 administrative fee clause. I explained that the HOA had paid nearly $4,000 in administrative fees over 2 years to a company owned by Colleen's husband. I showed the business registration for North Shore TOW and the marriage record linking Colleen to David Martinez. I said, "This is a conflict of interest, and it appears that meeting minutes were altered to conceal board opposition to the contract. I request that the board suspend all parking enforcement actions, void the tow contract, and authorize an independent audit of vendor payments." Colleen stood up. Her face was red. She said, "This is defamatory. You are accusing me of fraud based on a series of coincidences and out-of-context documents." I said, "These are not coincidences. These are timestamps, vote records, and public business filings." Colleen said, "The minutes were revised because there were clerical errors in the original drafts. That is standard procedure." I said, "Revising a vote tally is not a clerical error. Changing a failing vote to a passing vote is fraud." She said, "You do not have any proof that I personally made those changes." I said, "I have proof that the changes were made, and I have proof that you benefited financially from the contract that was approved as a result of those changes. That is enough to warrant an investigation." Colleen turned to Linda and said, "Are you going to let him stand here and accuse me of crimes?" Linda said, "I think we need to take this seriously. Frank said, I agree. If there are discrepancies in the minutes, we need to figure out how they happened. Colleen said, fine. Investigate. You will find nothing. Angela stood up again and said, I represent this homeowner in a pending small claims action. As part of that action, we have requested a full audit of HOA vendor payments and meeting records. If the board cooperates, this can be resolved quickly and quietly. If the board obstructs, we will file additional motions and request sanctions. The board has 10 days to respond to our discovery request. Linda said, we will cooperate. Colleen said, I want it on the record that I oppose this witch hunt. Linda ignored her and said, we will table the parking fines pending the outcome of the investigation. Meeting adjourned. As people started filing out, Colleen grabbed her bag and walked toward the door. Eric stepped in front of her and said, I told you this would catch up with you eventually. She said, get out of my way. He did not move. She tried to push past him, and he said, you owe a lot of people apologies, Colleen. She said, this conversation is not a debate, it is a directive, and then she shoved past him and left. Janet came over to me and said, that was incredible. I asked her if she thought the board would actually follow through. She said, Linda will, Frank will. Colleen will fight it, but she just lost her majority. The next week, the board hired an independent auditor to review the vendor payments and meeting minutes. The auditor was a guy named Tom, who specialized in nonprofit governance. He spent 3 days going through the records and interviewing board members. I gave him a copy of my evidence binder. Eric gave him his binder. Ron sent him the email. Angela provided the court filings. At the end of the week, Tom released a preliminary report. The report confirmed that multiple meeting minutes had been altered after finalization, that the alterations consistently favored vendor contracts and rule changes, and that the North Shore Tao contract had been approved based on a vote tally that did not match the original records. The report also noted that Colleen had not disclosed her spousal relationship with the tow company owner, which was a violation of the HOA's conflict of interest policy. The report recommended that the board void the tow contract, refund all administrative fees paid to North Shore Tao, and remove Colleen from any role involving vendor selection or enforcement. The board voted to accept the recommendations at an emergency meeting the following Monday. Colleen was not present. Linda read a resignation letter from Colleen into the record. The letter said Colleen was stepping down for personal reasons and denied any wrongdoing. But I was not done. The HOA had voided the contract and removed Colleen, but I still had not been made whole. I had spent money on an attorney, I had been subjected to retaliatory fines, and I had been locked out of the portal. I wanted compensation. Angela filed an amended complaint in small claims court requesting reimbursement for legal fees, statutory damages for the open meetings law violation, and a court order requiring the HOA to update its governance policies to prevent future abuse. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. If you are enjoying this investigation, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA and neighborhood justice stories. The hearing took place at the county courthouse on a Thursday morning. Linda represented the HOA, along with a lawyer the board had hired. Colleen did not attend, but David Martinez did. He sat in the back row with his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. I sat at the plaintiff table with Angela. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Brennan, and she had a reputation for not tolerating procedural games. Angela presented the evidence, the altered minutes, the vote discrepancy, the tow contract, the conflict of interest, the retaliatory fines, the portal lockout, and the closed session attempt. The HOA's lawyer argued that the board had acted in good faith, that the alterations were clerical errors, and that the board had taken corrective action as soon as the issue was brought to their attention. Judge Brennan asked the HOA lawyer if Colleen had disclosed her relationship with the tow company owner when the contract was approved. The lawyer said no. Judge Brennan asked if the board had any written policy requiring conflict of interest disclosures. The lawyer said yes. Judge Brennan asked why the policy had not been enforced. The lawyer did not have a good answer. Judge Brennan asked me if I had any additional evidence. I said I did. I pulled out the last piece of evidence I had been holding back, the trump card I had not mentioned yet. I did not mention my evidence yet, because I wanted her to repeat the story first. I handed the judge a printed spreadsheet. It was a payment ledger I had pulled from the HOA's financial reports, cross-referenced with the call logs from North Shore Tao that I had subpoenaed as part of discovery. The ledger showed that over the past 2 years, the HOA had paid North Shore Tao for 37 TOWs. The call logs showed that Colleen had personally authorized 34 of those tows, but here was the kicker. The call logs also showed that 19 of those tows had been canceled before the tow truck arrived, and the homeowner had been charged a $50 cancellation fee anyway. The cancellation fees had been split between the HOA and North Shore Tow under a revenue-sharing clause buried in the contract. Colleen had been generating revenue for the HOA and her husband's company by threatening tows and then canceling them after homeowners paid the fee. It was a shakedown, and the call logs proved it. Judge Brennan read the ledger and the call logs. She looked at the HOA's lawyer and said, "Did your client know about this?" The lawyer said, "I have no knowledge of that arrangement." Judge Brennan said, "This is fraud. This is not a governance dispute. This is theft by deception." She looked at Linda and said, "Does your board intend to report this to the police?" Linda looked pale. She said, "We were not aware of the revenue-sharing clause." Judge Brennan said, "You are aware of it now. I am ordering you to report this matter to the Duluth Police Department within 72 hours. I am also ordering the HOA to refund every cancellation fee paid under this arrangement, with interest. The board will reimburse the plaintiff for all legal fees and statutory damages in the amount of $5,000. The tow contract is void, and any future tow authorizations must be approved by a majority vote of the board in open session. Do you understand?" Linda nodded. Judge Brennan looked at me and said, "Do you have anything else?" I said, "One more thing. I would like the court to issue a documented no trespass instruction prohibiting Colleen Martinez from entering any common areas or attending any HOA meetings for a period of 2 years." Judge Brennan said, "Granted." She banged her gavel and said, "We are adjourned." David Martinez stood up and walked out without saying a word. Linda came over to me after the hearing and said, "I am sorry this happened. I should have caught it sooner." I said, "You can make it right by following through on the reforms." She said she would. Angela and I walked out of the courthouse together, and she said, "That was one of the most satisfying wins I have had in a long time." I asked her if she thought Colleen would face criminal charges. She said it depended on whether the police decided to investigate, but the evidence was strong enough that it was likely. 3 days later, I got an email from Dennis at the management company. The subject line was "Account Reinstatement and Refund." The email said my portal account had been reactivated, all fines had been voided, and I would receive a check for $5,000 within 10 business days. The email also said the board had adopted new governance policies requiring conflict of interest disclosures, third-party audits of all vendor contracts, and mandatory recording of all board meetings. I replied and thanked him for the follow-up. The check arrived a week later. The fallout continued for months. Colleen and David's names were all over the neighborhood Facebook group. People started sharing their own stories of questionable tows and retaliatory fines. It turned out I was not the only one who had been targeted. A homeowner named Lisa said she had been fined 3 times for landscaping violations that did not match the written rules. Another homeowner named Mark said he had been threatened with a lien after he questioned a pool access fee that was not in the budget. The board set up a hotline for people to report past enforcement issues, and they received over 40 complaints in the first month. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation into HOA practices in Minnesota, citing my case as an example of governance abuse. The investigation is still ongoing. Colleen and David moved out of the neighborhood 6 months after the hearing. I do not know where they went, and I do not care. The new pool and amenities chair is a retired teacher named Susan, who actually follows the rules and does not threaten people. The board elected Frank as the new president, and he has been working with Angela to draft a homeowner bill of rights that will be added to the covenants. The neighborhood is quieter now. People are not afraid to push back when something does not make sense. The portal actually works. The meeting minutes are accurate. It feels like a real community instead of a shakedown operation. I still have the evidence binder on a shelf in my home office. Sometimes I pull it out and flip through it, just to remind myself that documentation matters and that systems can be fixed when enough people care. I also keep a printed copy of Judge Brennan's order in the binder, right at the front. It is a reminder that the law is on your side when you have proof, and that HOAs are not above accountability. If you are dealing with a HOA that changes the rules after you comply, manufactures violations to justify fines, or hides conflicts of interest behind procedural delays, you can fight back. Document everything. Request records. Get legal help. Do not let them exhaust you into giving up. A few weeks after the hearing, I ran into Janet at the mailbox cluster. She asked me how I was holding up. I said I was fine, and I asked her if she had heard anything about Colleen. She said someone told her that Colleen had tried to join the HOA board in her new neighborhood and had been rejected after a background check. Apparently, word travels fast in HOA circles. Janet laughed and said, "Karma is real." I said, "Sometimes karma needs a little help." She nodded and said, "You did a good thing. A lot of people were too scared to speak up, and you gave them a voice." I thanked her. The funny thing is, Colleen's own clip proves the opposite of her claim. After the case was over, Angela sent me a copy of the call log analysis that the auditor had prepared. It included a breakdown of every tow Colleen had authorized, including timestamps and cancellation notes. One of the entries caught my eye. It was a tow authorization Colleen had called in for a vehicle she claimed was parked illegally in the guest lot. The call log showed that she had requested the tow at 8:15 in the evening. But the doorbell camera footage from my front porch, which I had submitted as part of my evidence, showed that the vehicle she was trying to tow was still parked legally in the guest lot at 8:30, and it did not leave until 9:45. Colleen had called in a tow for a vehicle that had not violated any rules yet, because she assumed it would still be there when the tow truck arrived. The tow truck showed up at 8:50, saw that the vehicle was still legally parked, and canceled the job. The homeowner was still charged the $50 cancellation fee. That single call log entry summarized everything. Colleen was not enforcing rules. She was manufacturing violations to generate revenue. The call log proved it, and she had authorized it herself. I never saw Colleen again after the resignation letter was read into the record, but I did see David one more time. It was about 8 months after the hearing, and I was at a gas station near the highway. He was pumping gas 2 lanes over. He saw me, and for a second I thought he might come over and say something. Instead, he just stared at me with this tired, defeated look, then got in his truck and drove away. I did not feel sorry for him. He had built a business model on exploiting his wife's authority, and when it collapsed, he lost everything. That is not bad luck, that is consequences. The HOA settled with me in small claims court. The board lost and paid costs, and I got my legal fees reimbursed plus statutory damages. The parking fines were voided. The tow contract was terminated. Colleen resigned. David's company lost its biggest client. The neighborhood got new governance policies. And I got my life back. I can park in the guest slot overnight if I need to. I can use the pool without worrying about surprise rule changes. I can log into the portal without getting locked out. It is a small thing, but it matters. The last time I checked the HOA portal, I saw that the board had posted the new conflict of interest policy and the vendor contract approval process. Both documents were clear, specific, and enforceable. The meeting minutes are now recorded and posted within 48 hours, with video backup. The board added a public comment period to every meeting, and homeowners can submit questions in advance. It is not perfect, but it is better. And that is what I was fighting for all along, a system that works the way it is supposed to, where the rules apply to everyone and the people in charge are held accountable. I still live in Woodland Crossing Ridge. I am not planning to move. I like my house, I like most of my neighbors, and I am not going to let one corrupt board member drive me out. Besides, I have a reputation now. People know I am the guy who took on the HOA and won. When someone has a problem with enforcement or a questionable fine, they come to me for advice. I have helped 3 other homeowners file records requests, and 2 of them found discrepancies in their own cases. One of them is considering a small claims filing. I have become the neighborhood's unofficial HOA watchdog, and I am okay with that. Someone has to keep them honest. A couple of months ago, Frank asked me if I would consider joining the board. I told him I would think about it. I have not decided yet. Part of me wants to stay on the outside, where I can push back without being stuck in the procedural grind. But another part of me thinks that the best way to keep the board accountable is to be on the board, to make sure the reforms actually stick and the next Colleen does not slip through the cracks. I have not made up my mind, but I am leaning toward yes. If I do join, I am bringing my binder with me as a reminder of what happens when people stop paying attention. Eric called me last week and said he heard I might run for the board. He said he would vote for me, and he would come back to meetings if I won. I told him I appreciated that, but I was still thinking it over. He said, "You already did the hard part. You proved the system can work. Now you just have to make sure it keeps working." He is right. That is the fight that never ends. Systems do not fix themselves. People fix them, and then people have to keep them fixed. It is exhausting, but it is worth it. Janet told me the other day that the neighborhood feels different now. She said people are not afraid to speak up at meetings anymore, and the board actually listens. She said it is because of what I did, and I should be proud of that. I told her it was not just me. It was Eric, Ron, Angela, Tom the auditor, Judge Brennan, and everyone else who refused to let it slide. She said, Maybe, but you were the one who reopened the case. You were the one who connected the dots. You were the one who stood up in that meeting and made them listen. I did not know what to say to that, so I just said thank you. The best part of this whole thing is not the money or the policy changes, or even the satisfaction of watching Colleen's scheme fall apart. The best part is knowing that the next time someone tries to pull this kind of scam, there is a paper trail that will catch them, and there are people in the neighborhood who know how to fight back. That is the legacy I want to leave. Not a victory, but a system that works. A system that protects people instead of exploiting them. A system that holds the powerful accountable instead of giving them cover. That is what I fought for, and that is what I got. If you are reading this, or listening to this, and you are dealing with your own HOA nightmare, I want you to know that you are not powerless. You are not alone. You have rights, you have remedies, and you have the law on your side if you are willing to do the work. Document everything. Request records. Get legal help. Show up to meetings. Ask questions. Do not let them exhaust you into giving up. It is hard, it is frustrating, it is expensive, and it takes time. But it is worth it. Because at the end of the day, your home is your home, and no one should be able to take that away from you with fake rules and altered minutes. I am glad you tuned in.